Welcome to Watch One, and thanks for logging on. Well, we've survived the weekend once more, and Monday is Mailbag. I'm here with Jason Main, watch buyer for Watch One and Govberg. Pleasure to have you here, Jason. I think it's important to remind everyone why we call you a watch buyer. Because, after all, if you want to sell your watch, tell people how they can do that.
So I buy watches all day long, buy, sell, and trade. You know, all three of those are very, very vital to what I do on a daily basis. So it's important to note that we do sell quite a bit of watches, but half the calls I get are for bringing watches in as well. So it's a pretty easy process. You know, reach out to us.
I like the back catalog. As all of you guys know, I tend to buy watches that are a couple of years old, and for me the most interesting watches to buy are often the most interesting watches that we buy as a company. So if you have watches that you're not wearing, if you have a watch that perhaps you, I don't know, would just like to trade in for something, a little bit more your style as you evolve as a watch collector, remember, we buy watches. We are the most aggressive buyer of watches in the internet, in the industry, around the world, answering the phones 24 hours a day. Yes, I'm putting that on him.
It happens 24/7. You can call, doesn't always mean I'm going to answer, but yeah, 24/7. You can call, text, email, whatever works best for you. Live chat, you know, smoke signals, send a balloon.
Hey, no matter what, guys, we are the easiest way to sell your watch. So that said, I want to let you guys know that Watch You Want Watch Reviews is my other channel. I have two channels on YouTube, and that's not counting Govberg for the new stuff, but Watch You Want Watch Reviews is the way to get the old style on the wrist reviews, the quick hits, 5 to 7 minutes. The hardware store opens 7/24, and next week, the return of Watches Live. We're going to be doing a tight, sharp, 30-minute format with just as many giveaways, so roughly every 8 minutes, I'm going to be giving away something awesome to people who are watching, and we're also going to have live deals available exclusively during Watches Live with our Govberg Watch You Want pre-owned inventory. Watches Live next Tuesday, 6:30 p.m. U.S. Eastern. Okay, folks, those of you joining us in the chat, Juan, Gabriel, Marco, Josh, hey. My Friday regular. Also, Stefano, CQ Gottlieb, friend of the house, longtime friend of the house, up here during the hurricane. And of course, Thumper JDM, Captain Zed, Noah, Kaizen, welcome, guys. All right, let's play this or that. But first, let's do some wrist shots. Jason, what you got?
Trusty 510 today. So, PAM 510, this watch is 3 to 4 months old. I've had it now. And it's been on a few different straps, but so far so good.
Is that one the Ranger? Is that what that strap's called?
This is an aftermarket strap. It's just a nice, thick oil tan strap.
That's nice stuff. So let me ask, you've had this watch for how long?
About 4 months.
And how many straps do you have for it?
6 or 7.
Yep, Panerai. All right. So from Panerai, we keep it in the family at Richemont. Jaeger LeCoultre, my Duomet chronograph. This is a watch that was my dream watch for about 4 years. I thought about it at least once a day, sometimes twice, thrice, or more. Every minute on my wrist, every 1/6 of a second is a pleasure. I'm a fortunate man. So guys, let's play this or that. Now, watches that we don't have on the set tonight, nevertheless, they are here in spirit. Jason, Rolex Deep Sea D-Blue, a big, bold blue special edition diver, extreme diver, or, from the other side of the globe, the Grand Seiko High Beat 36,000 professional 600 diver. Let's quickly go over their credentials. The Rolex costs $12,350. It's a bit more expensive than the standard Sea-Dweller Deep Sea. 44 millimeters stainless steel with a titanium case back, 18 millimeters thick. Launched in August 2014, water resistant to 3,900 meters, unique blue dial inspired by James Cameron.
Right.
Okay, so Grand Seiko. Okay, so the High Beat diver is technically the SBGH 257 High Beat 36,000 professional 600 meter diver. A big watch with a big name. Okay, 46.9 millimeters, but in titanium. Roughly 17 and a half millimeters thick. It's a bit slimmer than the Rolex. Limited to 500, 9,800 US dollars. Iron hobnail blue dial that's channeling a little bit of AP with a little bit of Grand Seiko flair. Which one of these watches is more your style? If you were spending your own money, which one?
So that's a lot to ponder. It's tough. If I'm going value play, you know, I feel like you get more for your money from the Seiko, which is probably not a popular opinion by most you know, watch guys. You know, Rolex is king for a reason. It's going to hold, you know, it's going to hold more value on the secondary market. It's going to be more liquid. It's going to be easier to, you know, impress your friends. The Seiko is probably not the popular choice, but I think for what you get for the money, being titanium, that movement, exclusivity of the limited edition, you know, would I go spend full retail for one? Probably not. But, you know, I think either of those watches you can find on the secondary market relatively easily. I would probably, and just because that specific Rolex is not my favorite Rolex, I'd probably go the Seiko.
Okay, so I tried to line them up so it's more or less even. Both of these are big burly divers with a heavy tinge of blue and a little bit of special or limited edition allure to them. The Rolex, of course, not a limited edition, but a special edition in honor of James Cameron's Deep Sea expedition in the submarine of the same color as the signal green on the dial. The Rolex does have a helium escape valve. Seiko pointedly insists that their watch does not require one, like the original Seamaster 600 in the 70s. The idea is that even helium can't leak into the case. I'm sure they've tested the theory, so I have no reservations. Ultimately, for this, in my case, it comes down to the Grand Seiko being a more interesting watch. Now, I will give the Rolex its advantages. It's built tougher, it's got a much higher depth rating, which does translate into all-around durability. The thickness of the gaskets, the reserve water resistance as seals and lubricants age, the thickness of the crystal if you nail it against something, and of course the Cerachrom bezel. Grand Seiko does not use ceramic bezels on its divers, so you're getting anodized aluminum with Seiko and you're getting ceramic with Rolex. You're also getting the world's best dive clasp with the Rolex. We have a great picture of the world's best dive clasp. It has a sawtooth micro adjust slider plus roughly I would say like a 25 millimeter flip lock. So it has glide lock and flip lock. The Rolex offers a lot for your money, but I think the 36,000 vibration movement, the hand finished case, and the better value for the Seiko. With the hobnail dial, that does it for me.
That dial sells the watch for sure.
Also, the Grand Seiko, a limited edition for this year, I believe that watch is sold out. So you're going to have to pick it up on the secondary market. Okay, so here, this is an interesting question from Thumper JDM, and this is one for the assembled. Why are Panerais called PAMs instead of PANs? I've heard a theory on this. Do you know for sure, Jason?
You know what? Sadly, I don't know a definitive reason why that is. It's just kind of one of those things that it's always been that way. I don't know.
I mean, it's definitely a Richemont era thing, because before the Vendôme, that's Cartier buyout of Panerai in 1997, everything had a purely numerical designation. The theory is that for English language kind of universal consumption, the idea was that it would be abbreviated Panerai model, which shortened became PAM. That's the theory that I've heard, the one that seems to hold the most water over time, but I don't know if there's a definitive answer.
I'd buy that.
It makes sense. It's like the Scorpions. You know, they sang in English because, well, why? They're a German band, but English is like the language of rock and roll, so that was the justification. Make it more commercially viable. It's probably the same thing with Panerai with its Swiss and Italian roots. Okay, so moving out into the testing zone, we have a great question from Chris E. And by the way, Juan, I see your question about the Rolex 3135 and 3235. Hang on, and I'm going to get to that. But Chris E. did email me about scratch-resistant watch options. And Jason, if you could just real quick, before we roll through these, give me the strengths and weaknesses of ceramic for customers, because I know this is a controversial topic in luxury watches.
Sure. Now, I know that we're going to run through some different materials and some pros and cons and stuff like that. But so for ceramic, is a material that you're going to want to wear a watch, you know, every day in and day out. But you're a desk guy, right? You're not a firefighter, you're not a policeman, you're not, you know, active military. This is for your 9-to-5 type guy, every day, knocking it around a desk, you know, and you're not worried about scratching the buckle up because it's ceramic. But you hit that watch the right way, or you drop it from a pretty decent mount while you're putting it on your wrist, and you're going to have problems. So.
Exactly. So what Jason's saying is it's pretty much binary. If you're going to abuse your watch up to a certain threshold, as long as you stay below that threshold of fracture and cracking, the watch may never get a mark. But the second you give it a hard knock, it goes from being not broken to broken. It's not like a metal case where it goes from perfect to a little scuffed to scratched to dented. There's no continuum with ceramic. It's broken or it is not broken, and it's best for the type who normally get light scratches and scuffs. So having said that, Chris asks, Tim, after reading about and image searching ceramic watch failures, I'm soured on ceramics. What options do I have for scratch-resistant watches that aren't ceramic? And I'll add, guys, I've seen every single ceramic model, like going back to the very first Rado and IWCs from the 90s and 80s, I've seen them fracture. There is no ceramic watch that's completely immune to fracture, even though certain are better. So what are the alternatives? Hard metal. That's the Blue Oyster Cult. That's the classic lineup, guys. That's old school. That's back when both Bouchards were still in the band. So the Rado DiaStar, almost as old as the Blue Oyster Cult. From 1962, the first tungsten carbide watch. It was revolutionary, but the process required to make it pretty much imposed that weird semi-lenticular shape. The UFO for your wrist, but arguably the first scratch-resistant watch, 1400 to 1700 Vickers. The other option would be something like a surface treatment, like with Bremont watches. Now they use a surface hardening so that the outer layer of their steel is approaching 2000 Vickers. So this is a very good solution for someone who wants to have the scratch resistance of ceramic, but in the event of a big knock, doesn't want to have to worry about chipping the case in two. So I think that's a great option. Talk a little bit about Panerai Composite, Jason, because you're a Panerai collector. I know these are watches you encounter from time to time. What's it like on the wrist?
Composites, I mean, it's great to wear. If you're a titanium fan, it's going to be a little bit lighter than titanium. I'd equate it to something like, essentially, like a compressed carbon from AP or something like that. Or if you're from, I'm sure plenty of guys out there have Luminox. It has that same kind of, almost too lightweight to believe quality. It sits on the wrist really well. It's a temperature neutral material, so it's not going to heat up throughout the day or, contract, excuse me.
Also hypoallergenic.
Yeah, it's hypoallergenic. It's going to be a very lightweight material that's durable to the point where you're going to dent it before you fracture the case. It's going to be pretty easy to wear, lightweight, comfortable. It's a nice material.
And exactly, like Jason says, because it's an aluminum core, you have the shatter resistance of the metal. But it's a ceramized outer layer, so that chemical change that takes place over the surface gives you that surface scratch resistant of ceramic. Now, the 339 is probably the best known example, but any Panerai watch that's identified as composite up to this point has that ceramized aluminum. And it's something that other companies use. There's Panerai's Composite, there's JLC Cermet. They call it Cermet for ceramic and metal. You can see that in the Deep Sea family. There's also Zenith's ceramized aluminum. You could see that, for instance, on the Range Rovers. Another great option. They actually describe it as what it is, ceramized aluminum. Wears light, scratch resistant, can't fracture or shatter. But I will say that if you want a more budget-oriented option, you can go with grade 5 titanium. And in general, I found that short of real outright abuse, like unless you're ramming your fist through the engine compartment of a car working on an engine block, grade 5 is going to be almost as scratch resistant as ceramic. That's what I've found. And Jason, you can get that in, for instance, the Omega Planet Ocean range.
Sure, yeah.
I mean, what's your impression of the Planet Oceans as everyday watches?
I mean, I'm a big fan of the Planet Oceans. I prefer the 3-handle or GMT version than the chronograph. I find the chronograph a little bit clunky, in my opinion, but they make a fantastic watch. Something that will take some abuse. It's definitely a day in, day out watch. One thing I will mention, since we talked about last Monday, the brand Damasco.
Yes.
Damasco does offer a heat-treated case. So much like the Bremont, instead of it's almost exactly like the Bremont to a certain Vicker, but instead of being treated only a few millimeters thick, it's actually throughout the entire case. So okay. That's a good kind of budget-friendly pickup too.
Now, of course, I will say, out of purely selfish motivation that we do have a number of JLC Cermet and Omega Planet Ocean watches available. If you want to see what a relatively scratch-resistant option looks like, check out our website at watchyouwant.com. All right. Shameless self-promotion over. I do want to mention one offbeat option because it's not scratch resistant, but it's almost a scratch denial option because it hides it so well, and that's forged carbon. You've seen a lot of forged carbon AP over the year, also some Hublot, some Linda Verdlin. What's your impression about how the matrix kind of hides a scratch in its chaos?
Yeah, it's just like anything carbon fiber or anything with a textured pattern. Like, you know, to some point you see some rough finish. Some manufacturers will do rough finish or sandblasting or stonewash to hide scratches. Same thing. You know, the material itself lends itself well to hide scratches. You know, it'll take a dent, it'll take a nice beating. As long as the lines on the case stay relatively sharp, generally the watch will look like new for a long time. You can wear it, you know, quite a bit.
Now, forged carbon's great again because it has sort of a chaotic layup to it because of the directions of the fibers in every which way. It tends to hide scratches because of that, because it doesn't have a uniform finish, and also because it's a homogeneous color. It's black on top of black on top of black. A scratch or a scuff tends not to show up on it. It's also worth mentioning that because it's a composite, it's not one uniform material all the way through. It tends to stop fracture lines from forming straight through the case. You know, if you think of something like glass, which is a uniform material, it can shatter. That's a lot more difficult to do with a composite, which is why, you know, tile is more liable to fracture than concrete, for example. Anytime you can create a matrix that can break up fracture lines, that can create a radius to stop cracks, and forged carbon does this, you can avoid shattering outright. So forged carbon has a lot to recommend it if you are interested in something that hides scratches and scuffs. Okay, so I want to answer Juan's question, because I said I would, about Rolex's 3135 and 3235. The main difference is going to be power reserve, the integration of Rolex's own Paraflex shock absorption system, the chronergy escapement, the reprofiled mainspring barrel and train. All of this adds up to a much longer power reserve approaching 3 days. It also creates a watch that is probably going to run more evenly in terms of chronometric performance from maximum to minimum power reserve. And I do expect it'll take over the 3135 across the range. The 3136 was created for the Datejust 2 to sit inside a bigger case with a different date wheel. That was a step forward, but it was kind of a middle step. The big leap forward for the mainstream Rolex automatic is going to be that 3235, and I do think it will eventually replace all the 3135s across the range. Okay, so Jason, we've got a lot of questions coming through. One from David Mercer. He's a fan of Lange watches, a Lange und Söhne, but you know, obviously right now resale values are kind of soft. Do you see room for them to increase in value over time? Is there a way to revisit this brand 5, 10 years down the line?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it's all speculation at that point, but I certainly think that where the brand is now, and you know, quite frankly, where it's probably going to be in the next 6 months, would lend itself well to picking one up now and hoping for the best. I don't think that there could be a decline past kind of where we're at now, or maybe in 6 months where they're going to be. But I think you know, it's a great brand. I mean, the stuff they produce is phenomenal. So if you're going to look for something that, you know, kind of take a shot at making an investment play, I think wait until, you know, just like the stock market, wait until the prices are really good, pick one up and hope for the best, right?
And I'll say, guys, right now, this is a buyer's market for Lange. I think there will be a rapid correction. First of all, they haven't exactly flooded the market, making 5,000 watches a year. Oversupply is a small amount of watches, relatively speaking, in their case, and they can get their hands on that relatively quick, get a handle on it relatively quick, and you know, that surplus will disappear in 18 months. They have far fewer watches outstanding than the Swiss watch industry in general. Lange being a smaller manufacturer, I feel like the correction could happen much quicker with them, and the product is on par with the likes of Patek Philippe, Laurent Ferrier, Audemars, and Vacheron at their best. So I would say, if you want to buy a pre-owned watch now at a stupid, crazy good value, Lange in the current market. Get one now and be glad you did. Okay, so here's a question. Josh is asking, what about a Panerai Carbotech? Do you think, I mean, you've seen like the 616, Jason. Do you think they hide scratches as well as a traditional forged carbon?
It's a tough, so the Carbotech has those pre-layered lines, and I think to your point with like a forged carbon and having that structural integrity, I feel like the forged carbon's gonna, hide the scratches a little bit better and also be tougher. So think like your glass analogy, like think bulletproof glass versus regular pane of glass. Yes. But I would say the forged carbon is probably stronger than the Carbotech. It might,
Yeah, in terms of hiding scratches and scuffs, I got to agree with what Jason says. The Carbotech is beautiful. It's different, and I actually think it's a great way for Panerai to expand its offerings without compromising the shape, the simplicity, or the honest function of their watches. I think materials gives them room to run into the future, but Carbotech does have a much more orderly, precise, and horizontally striated pattern that sort of spans the case, and a scratch in that beyond a certain point I think is going to be more visible than in forged carbon. It's a much more regular carbon fiber layout. For those of you in composites, you know exactly what I mean. Think the rings of a tree rather than just paper mache going everywhere. Okay, so guys, I have to say ultimately all of these special scratch-resistant features will endow a watch with wonderful longevity. And that's why I have today's version of the Blue Oyster Cult, who I'm going to see November 10th at the Tillis Center. Wow. They're older than my parents. This is going to be great. But they still rock. And unlike the Rolling Stones, they don't need a cane to get around on stage. And unlike Ozzy, they can actually remember the words to their songs. Okay. As seen on eBay, have you seen it, folks? Jason, have you seen it?
I have not yet. I actually heard it was pretty good.
It setting all kinds of box office records. We're starting to think about Halloween. Well, if that didn't keep you awake all night, guys, avert your eyes. The rest of you with strong stomachs, a hilarious Frankenwatch replica of the Platinum Reverso 2. My tourbillon is on eBay right now. That's the real one, okay? This is a mutated imitation of my watch, and I'm gonna say, seeing something like this doesn't just hit close to home. I have to say, this is the worst Frankenwatch I've ever seen in my career, in years in the watch industry, in years as a watch nerd. I've never seen anything bad. Dr. Frankenstein himself would scoff at this thing. I mean, that's an actual JLC Rose Gold 828 tourbillon movement stuffed into a non-rotating stainless steel aftermarket case. So, just to keep score, that's an actual 828 from the 1993 Reverso Tourbillon limited edition, the Rose Gold. It's in a non-reversing steel homemade case, and it's being listed as a Jaeger-LeCoultre Reverso Tourbillon by this seller. Okay, crazy things happen on the bay, but I gotta ask Jason, how did this happen?
I've searched eBay before. I've found some stuff that makes you think like, what are people doing? This is pretty bad. This has got to be one of the worst. So I don't know who I feel worse for: the guy that picks that up not knowing and thinking he's getting a like a prototype or a one-off type watch, or that movement that's had a life.
I mean,
where did that movement come from?
That's the other question.
Where's the case?
Where's the serial? Yeah, where's the case? Where's the case and the serial numbers? Where's the dial? Where's the rest of the watch? Now, I'll give the credit to the seller. He does say this is an aftermarket stainless steel case. But first of all, it's not a Reverso. It's not a JLC tourbillon at this point. It's a JLC tourbillon movement in an unholy vessel. But, I mean, whatever happened to the original watch, we don't know, but very creepy that there's no background given for something this dramatic and bizarre. I'll also say, why does almost all of the other sellers' history consist of random electronics and apparel accessories like sandals and stuff? There is something not right here, guys. I'm sorry, Pennywise, but this is the horror blockbuster of 2017. Ching, 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 ching. That's pretty bad, guys. That's as bad as it gets. All right, we set an all-time worst. Okay, so questions coming through. The sticker price from JBO Surf, the sticker price for that monstrosity, it looked like the seller was asking something like $14,000. Like it was real money, it wasn't junk money. It wasn't a giveaway, and it was priced like something still semi-valuable. All I can say is stay far from this thing. Lots of red flags, issues far beyond authenticity going on here. That's what a monstrosity. That's a Frankenwatch. That is the Frankenwatch. There needs to be a textbook of watch terminology, and under Frankenwatch, a picture of that thing, with viewer discretion advised. All right, yikes. Okay, so Jason, we got an interesting question from Saul H, and he's asking, how many times can a watch be polished? Should I elect or decline the complimentary polish every time I send a watch in for service? Where are you coming from with this, Jason?
That's a good question. So, you know, obviously coming from the pre-owned space, this is important. I guess it depends on what kind of watch it is, and is it vintage, is it a newer era piece, what's the material? I would say you're better off not polishing, as you know, obviously as often as possible. You know, I come kind of from the older school of thought where it's like once every 3 or 4 years. So, you know, some people tell you once a year. You know, I've taken some polishing classes and some refinishing stuff, and I've seen how easy it is to, you know, mess up a watch. So I would say, you know, don't polish it unless you really have to.
And I agree with that. I would have to say, remember how damaging polishing can be. First of all, the term polish is terrible because it implies that everything is just putting a shiny sheen on a watch to make it look new. Some finishes are a lot more nuanced, and some are much, much more nuanced, more about lines and character and definition and transitions than the actual surface itself. Sanding with abandon can reduce this down to this. Since we know and expect this, the best thing you can do is only polish when you have to. My opinion is that every second or third factory servicing, you can elect the complimentary polish. You know how they always throw that in for free? Consider how easy it is to do, and remember that the option always exists to do it down the line if you want to. And the fact that they do it for free as part of a regular service on most watches shows you that it's not a big deal. So keep that card in reserve. Only refinish when something seriously begins to lose its fundamental character. The only time I've ever seen a brand specifically give a number of polishings, like a lifetime maximum limit. First of all, let me consider a case with strong lines like this Bulgari Octo. It's a Brazil limited edition Octo by Retrograde that we've got. On a case like this, Bulgari says refinish no more than 8 times for the life of the case, with the assumption being that at the end of that cycle, you're going to need a case replacement. So I would say the best thing you can do is just try to prolong the process. Remember, the movement has a service life expectancy of centuries. No reason to get ahead of the curve with the case itself. Now, what's that like on vintage, Jason?
Vintage is even more scary. So you definitely want to buy, I mean, one of the advantages of buying vintage through Gauberg or through, you know, a very reputable AD is, you know, we take things like this very, you know, into consideration. So symmetry of lugs helps us determine how well something's been polished. You want symmetric lugs. You want as much material as possible. You want sharp lines on those lugs in that case. It depends on the watch too. If it's something, you know, like a dress piece, it's very important. Older Rolexes, that's important. Pretty much vintage, you know, you and I would probably agree. If it doesn't need it, don't touch it at all. You're much better off having that original patina or that original finish, even though it might not look that pretty. To some people, you know, dealers and people that collect those watches know what they're looking at. It's like finding a rare coin and just polishing it up because you think it's fun. It's not going to help.
That's precisely the fact. You can never, with the exception of very discrete and localized dents, which can be laser welded to fill them, with the exception of that one specific case, you cannot add metal to a watch. You can only subtract. Every refinishing, by definition, is reductive. So with that in mind, use sparingly. And I would also say, consider something like this Audemars Piguet Royal Oak 15202. There's a reason I went with that microcosm. Guys, if you could leave that up for a moment, look what's going on here. Notice how the steel bolts are below the plane of the satin finished bezel. That differential, that gap, is actually AP's internal threshold for bezel replacement. When the two become flush or the bolts stick up proud of the bezel, you got to replace. Look at the lip. Look at the actual transition point between the satin finished top and the polished flank. The definition of that transition, more than the shininess of the polish or the clarity of the grain, is the threshold for a buying up or buying down that watch when a watch buyer looks to purchase it. It's the definition of the line, not the condition of the surfaces. And then you look at the taper of the case flank, where that bevel swells as it approaches the lug, and the clear split between the satin side, the satin top, and the polish of the bevel, as well as the definition of the links. That's what you want to preserve. The surface condition itself, there's a lot more leeway for a little bit of disfigurement. When you lose this definition, that's when the watch becomes worth less money. And you can go over the geography of a piece of a watch that's like that big with that much discussion. The easy answer, don't refinish unless there's real damage. And Jason, like with something like a vintage Rolex, the worst thing you've seen, I think, is probably when there's marks on one side and they start finishing the lugs asymmetrically.
Yeah, it's bad. The worst thing about polishing is when you get a local guy that says that he knows what he's doing, and you know, it's a hack job. So that 15202 that you just put up, that's probably one of the most perfect examples of a watch that you definitely want done by a manufacturer. There's so much geography and planes and different angles that watch has to be disassembled for it to be polished correctly. And then it's going to require special tools for the finishing directions. You know, pretty much any piece that has specialized finishes, multiple selective surfaces, you're going to want the manufacturer, you're going to want the person that put it together in the first place to do that. Guys that are trained for that material, trained for that, you know, that special skill set, as opposed to, you know, the guy at the, it's going to change the battery and polish the watch at the same time.
Yeah, the $100 watch refinishing is going to deduct more value from your watch than you pay for the refinishing. The other thing I would remind guys is that factory bevels, for instance, a pre-super case Rolex, for practical purposes, let's just say Rolex made before 2005, obviously it's more nuanced by the model, but pre-2005, those original pre-super case Rolexes have beautiful tapered bevels, and here's the thing, guys. They can survive for decades against scratches and scuffs. They won't be as shiny, but you'll be able to see that transition still intact, and that definition is what collectors look for. The other thing they look for is that they don't want to see the spring bars protruding out from the hole in the side of the lug, because that means that like whole millimeters have been shaved off the side of the watch. So even with scratches and scuffs, most people would rather have it factory, because as the discussion goes with cars and watches, it's only factory once. So rules of thumb, I think, Jason, you nailed it. If you're going to refinish, refinish with a factory authorized service center.
Absolutely.
Go with that. Precious metals should be refinished less than base metals.
Oh, 100%. I wouldn't, I mean, one, I don't know that I'd, you know, go out of my way to own a precious metal piece just where I'm at in my life, but 100% rule of thumb, you own a precious metal watch, one, guys are not wearing, you know, those watches as much as a stainless steel or you know, a more durable piece, but two, just the length of the life of the piece is going to be reduced drastically more for a precious metal piece polishing. I mean, when we talk about polishing, like you were saying, you're deducting material, right? You're scraping, you know, micro millimeters off of watches. It's abrasive. So when you're dealing with a softer material like gold or platinum, something like that, you can go real wrong real quick.
And by the way, guys, I have seen documentation of platinum watches coming back, because that's super soft. That's the softest precious metal you'll see in practice. I've seen platinum watches come back from bad refinishers, actually weighing grams less than when they went out. And with platinum being priced by the ounce, grams, plural, is actual money, not just definition on your case. Other rule of thumb, at most opt for a refinish every other service or every other service. If it's a 3-year service interval, hey guys, refinish like once every 9 years if you can. Keep it going as long as you can. Also, the default choice for vintage is always to leave as is.
Yeah, 100%.
That's it.
Unless it's a cracked crystal or something like that,
Yeah.
but if we're just talking about refinishing the case, just leave it the way it is.
Yeah, unless like the bezel will no longer seat on the case or the case back will no longer fit, if it's damaged, okay, consider your options. Otherwise, leave as is. It's factory once. Finally, certain watches should be refinished solely at the factory, and this is generally any tantalum watch or Bamford's, because Bamford uniquely will recoat their black watches. That's a bigger consideration now that Zenith is doing factory warranted and factory ordered Bamfords. They can actually reconstitute black surface coating, and they're the only ones who can do that as far as I know. Okay, so Jason, guys, we are taking live questions tonight. Jason and I are here to answer all your queries about watches, and of course, Jason more of a sports watch collector, myself more of a dress watch collector. We always love to interact with our audience, and I know one question I always get is, I've got a graduate, I've got an occasion in my life, I'm buying my first serious watch. What's a reasonable price point to start at, Jason? I mean, is there a threshold for a question like that?
I guess it depends first, budget is the most important thing. So, coming from a retail space, I can find you something that's going to be special for depending on who the person is, what they're looking to do. What are they graduating? Are they graduating with a doctorate, or are they graduating with a master, in business? It depends what the outcome of the watch is going to be, what the budget is. Then we go and we narrow it down to what piece is going to be. A couple $1,000s, I would think we could find, relatively easily something that will fit most people.
So I have a question from Captain Zed. Are yellow and white gold the same hardness? No, white gold is much harder. White gold is the hardest gold alloy that's used in watches, which is oftentimes why you will see on older yellow gold watches with bracelets, you'll see the internal swing arms, the small moving parts, actually made of white gold. And I've seen that on Patek Philippe, on older yellow gold bracelets, because white gold is significantly harder. It's also more resilient, which is why it's often used for the base of enameled dials. It's generally rose or white gold used as the base. It is definitely harder, and I will say that although I prefer homogeneous white gold, it's hardest when it's actual coated white gold coated with rhodium. That can be very tough indeed, and that's why Patek used to do rhodium coated white gold, because it's very hard. Another question, Jason. Maybe this is neither here nor there, but Thumper JDM's asking, with Grand Seiko now removing the standalone Seiko from their dial, are the old ones that say both Seiko and Grand Seiko going to lose value, or is it model dependent?
I think it's model dependent. If anything, I would probably venture to say that it's going to be the opposite. I think the older ones eventually will gain a little bit of popularity. I've heard you say many times, there's only one first, right? So, it's just like we talk about the Tudors and the Black Bays and the stuff that has, the ETA movement versus the new in-house. A rebranding is only going to limit how many have ever been produced with the first brand on it. So,
okay. A question coming from Mash, and Mash, you're asking how much to refinish an AP. Honestly, if you service with a factory center, it will generally be just listed as complimentary, elect or refuse. It'll be something that's thrown in, and no company, no factory service, will ever just do a refinish. If you send in a watch for a refinish, they will request that you allow them to perform a minor service, and if you send a watch in for a full service, they'll throw in a free elective refinish in general. But in general, I would say if you wanted to just send it to a guy and have it done, maybe $450, $500, $800, certainly no more than $1,000. Although, if it's a full bracelet, steel, you might be looking at that. Okay, so interesting questions coming through right now. Okay, so what would you do with a chipped PVD case? This is from Eddie Landsberg. Is there anything you can do?
Sharpie?
That's actually not a bad suggestion. I've seen it done. Guys, chipped PVD case, if we're talking true PVD, where it's a steel or a titanium case and there's some sort of physical vapor deposition on the outside, that's what PVD is. In general, there's nothing that can be done about that. And like I said earlier, Bamford is unique in that it will take the watch back and recode it. But then again, Bamford is a very tiny division of a multi-billion-dollar defense contractor, so they may have access to more technology than your average watch shop that's doing aftermarket black Rolex. Okay, this is a question from me, from one of our users. Have I ever had one of my watches refinished, or do I embrace wear and tear? The only time I had a watch refinished was when I had a dent in a platinum watch and they laser welded the spot. So in general, no, I decline a refinish on my cases unless it's that one case, welding, where it can be added back. Generally, I would say no. Okay, guys, we're going to finish up with this. This is a question for Jason from Boston Watch Guy. I have a Audemars Piguet 15202, an FP Journe Chronomètre Bleu. I have a PAM 292, and a Sea-Dweller 4000. What is a good sub $15,000 chrono to add that is not called Daytona? That's
a collection right there.
Yeah. First of all, you're off to a great start.
Yeah. First of all, I'm impressed. I absolutely adore that Sea-Dweller 4000. I want one for myself. You know, let alone the Journe, the 15202 is amazing. We were just talking about that watch. I don't know, let's say off the beaten path, you like dive watches a little bit, maybe 50 Fathoms chronograph, Long Pond?
Pre-owned, I think that's possible.
Yeah, I think that'd be a cool piece. It's kind of diver, it's got a little bit of dress. You know, be a nice transitional piece between those pieces. What about you? What do you think?
I would say it would be a good idea if you're willing to consider a more aggressive sporting style. You've already got the PAM 292, so I know you're not opposed to a sporting-sized watch. Consider the new Zenith El Primero Day-Fi 21. That's going to be the Day-Fi El Primero, that's a superb watch from Zenith for well under $15,000. You could buy any of the 3 versions that were shown at Basel, and while the wait list continues to extend and deliveries haven't started, I would say that is an awesome choice. I would also say, you know, you've got options sub $15,000, so don't sell yourself short. If you're willing to take something a bit quirkier, I love the old IWC 3750s because you get a Da Vinci hinge lug in 39mm with a moon phase, perpetual calendar, automatic winding, and a chronograph. And it's a charming little thing that is welcome in almost any attire. Also, remember, Omega makes other watches beside the Moon watch. Remember, you can get a gray side of the moon paying full boat and save $3,000. So consider that pre-owned. You have anything else, Jason?
Please don't buy a gray side of the moon full price. Please don't do it.
This man can help you.
Yes.
Because not only does he buy watches 24 hours a day, as we've already mentioned, he also sells them 24 hours a day.
Trades, too. Most important. Call me.
Okay, guys, throw up Jason's number one more time for our folks who've joined us tonight. Jason Main, watch buyer for Goffberg and Watch You Want. Thank you folks so much for joining us. Thank you for all of your questions. Remember, we actually have some emails now. I think we've set up Monday Mailbag at govbergwatches.com, Watches Live at govbergwatches.com. You can forward your questions to those addresses and we will answer them in future episodes. Thank you everyone who joined us tonight. Thank you everyone who supports our broadcasts, and thank you so much, Jason, for being with us.
Yeah, it was great.
Sell your watch to him. I'm Tim, he's Jason, they're the 3 amigos. This is Watch You Want. Thanks for logging on.
Good stuff.